I did an experiment this week that I have been dying to do for months, and that is turn my knitting machine into a loom. So the idea is I could then take one of my images, and by following a similar process with my knitting machine, instead of creating knit fabric, I could connect a loom to it and create a woven fabric instead to give me some options. So a little background with me and weaving. So I went to art school where I mostly did painting and drawing, but I also dabbled a little bit in the fiber arts, including weaving, and I loved the loom room. There I got to use a floor loom, and it was so awesome and so fun, and I've always had this itch to weave, but I wasn't ever sure how I would use it in my art making, because when I do the fiber arts, I'm usually incorporating it into my art making and making images, more so than like garments and stuff. And so I really wasn't sure how I was going to use the finished product. But this kind of opened some doors for me about this idea that it could create pictures. And I understand that there's tapestry weaving and all of that, but from what I understand, not that I'm an expert, is that it's a lot of picking specific warp threads. And I'm not interested in that part of weaving. I'm interested in that rhythm that you get into. I get into it with the knitting machine. I remember that when working with the floor looms, that you get used to moving the treadles with your feet, and then the different shafts open, and then you can like throw the shuttle back and forth and create your fabric. And just that rhythmic pattern and creation was very meditative and warm and fun for me. So that's the part of weaving that's attractive to me. So tapestry weaving really wasn't of interest. And plus conceptually, I use knitting for some different reasons. But anyway. So maybe 6 months ago, I heard that there was a thing called the Knit Master, Weave Master or something. I heard this thing existed where knitting machine companies had made a loom that could connect to your knitting machine. And I've only found the one resource on it. I'll link it below. And so it's pretty rare to find and pretty expensive, I'm sure. And so I was like, once I watched the video and I understood the mechanics, I was like, I bet I could like MacGyver something together that could do the same thing. Well, let me explain how the Weave Master worked. So what I did was I picked up this really beautiful Ashford rigid heddle loom. And so it's a big one, I think like 36 inches or something. So you can see it's similar in size to my knitting machine. And the way it normally works is you put your warp back here, you feed it through this, and you can move this back and forth, and you would put yarn, the warp yarns, into the long slot in the little holes, right? And then that's how you would change the shaft, and you would create a weaving. But what I wanted to try to do was take my knitting machine here. So what the Weave Master did basically is it would send the warp up here. And you don't necessarily need a ribber for this, but I happen to have one, so I was going to use it. But they would send the warp onto the needles, onto each of these hooks, right? And then they would feed it through the beater bar. Put these little hooks together to hold it up. They'd feed them through the beater bar and then attach them back to the front here. By the time needles were selected, it would open up the shaft, and that's where they could weave in their yarn. And so people are doing this, or it's capable of doing this with different punch card machines, or you could use different tools to select your needles and create different patterns, just like you do with a knitting project. So then my little crazy brain went going, and I thought, well, I think this mechanics could work, but maybe what would be cool is if I could use my knitting machine, which I have hacked to work with the computer, have one of my 2 color images in there so that the carriage will select the needles for me based on my image, and then I would weave those. If that makes sense. So that was my goal. And so some things that went really well is the mechanics all work. It's true that every time a needle was selected, it would open up the shaft with those needles. So that was success. And the beater bar sitting here with these little makeshift hooks I put together totally worked as well. The carriage back and forth worked. All of that was success. What wasn't success is, I think, gauge issues. The gauge of the beater bar means that each one of these lines are further apart than the needles were on the bed. So it kind of moved the fabric like this, and it made each stitch really wide. And so I ordered myself a beater bar that has them closer together. The other thing was I was using the same gauge yarn for both the warp and the weft. And I really want this to be a weft facing piece, right? Because it's an image. And so I'm gonna try, and I don't know, I'm not super experienced in knitting or with weaving, but I was thinking if I had fluffier, thicker yarn for the weft versus the warp, that it would cover more of the warp up and then make the warp stand out more, the weft stand out more. So I ordered some thicker yarn than what I have here in the studio, and then the new beater bar. And so, yeah, those were the two big things. But yeah, that's what my setup is, and that's something that I've been experimenting on. I'm super excited about it. I think it's really fun, and it's a cool like puzzle to solve, you know, and I really get a kick out of that. So yeah, I will keep you updated on how this experiment goes. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I will put a link to that other video in the description so you guys can check it out and see what the official piece of equipment looks like. But yeah, I'm really excited to get into weaving and finding a way to incorporate it into the artwork that I produce. And I'm excited about what I might be able to do combining weaving with knitting in the same project. I think that could be really interesting. So yeah, so thank you so much for watching and have a good one. Hi, Editing Faith here. I just wanted to jump in really quick and tell you a little bit more about the loom. The loom is an Ashford rigid heddle loom. It's about 36 inches wide. I got it secondhand for a really great price. I don't think it cost more than $100 for a really good price. And nothing I'm doing to it is gonna alter or hurt the loom. So both the loom and the knitting machine, even though I'm combining them together, they both will still work equally as well, independent of each other. So there's still lots of flexibility on how to use the knitting machine and the loom in the future, solo or together. All right, thanks.